The corporate gala cake had 4 magnificent tiers. Dark chocolate fondant, genuine edible gold leaf pressed into the sleek sides, and the massive logo of my company, Sterling Analytics, glowing in the center. I had requested that specific minimalist design myself. It was a Thursday evening in late November, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, secured for the 10-year anniversary of the fintech empire I had built from absolute scratch. 400 influential guests, major venture capitalists, federal regulators, board members, and people I had known for my entire professional life. My sister-in-law Brittany stood up at exactly 7:11 p. and gracefully tapped her crystal champagne flute. The massive ballroom went entirely quiet. She smiled at everyone, that warm, deeply confident smile of a woman who believed she had already checked every single box on a master plan the rest of us hadn't even seen. She spoke for exactly 4 agonizing minutes. She said I had built a remarkable company. She said my recent executive health journey and extreme corporate burnout had given the family some incredibly important, difficult things to consider. She described an exclusive luxury psychiatric wellness retreat in upstate New York. Beautiful, sprawling grounds, she said, a dedicated psychiatric team, mandatory disconnect from all corporate technology, intensive daily therapies. She never looked at me once while she said it. Then, she took a deep breath and delivered the fatal blow. Victoria is stepping down as CEO and taking an indefinite mandatory medical leave at the Sunrise Wellness Retreat starting tomorrow morning. As her family, we have already arranged the temporary financial conservatorship to protect her assets. I set down my silver dessert fork. I looked at the glowing corporate cake. I did not speak for a long moment. If you have ever been quietly, aggressively erased by someone who smiled warmly while they did it, stay with me. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I am Victoria Sterling and this is Alpha Mom Stories. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Let me tell you exactly who I am, not to make you feel sorry for me, because you profoundly need to understand who Brittany was actually attempting to corner. I am 34 years old, that is how long I have been alive, but for the last decade, I have worked exclusively as a forensic auditor and the CEO of a financial technology firm that specializes in corporate fraud detection. We authenticate massive transaction ledgers for 3 major international banks. We assess forensic data for top-tier Wall Street hedge funds. We have unraveled shell companies ranging from minor embezzlements to a 9-figure crypto Ponzi scheme that turned out to be a very convincing, highly illegal laundering operation out of a digital market in 2023. I have testified as an expert witness in 14 federal fraud cases. I have helped put desperate, arrogant corporate criminals in federal prison for forgery and wire fraud. I deeply, fundamentally understand what irrefutable evidence is. I understand exactly what a flawless chain of documentation means in a court of law. I understand precisely and professionally what a signature looks like when it belongs to the person who supposedly wrote it, and exactly what it looks like when it absolutely does not. My parents passed away when I was in my early 20s, leaving me and my older brother, Mark, a modest life insurance trust. While Mark bought expensive cars and drifted, I took my half, invested it relentlessly, and built a massive 9-figure corporate empire. I live alone in a pristine minimalist penthouse in Tribeca. 3 bedrooms, a massive corner office with panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline, where I keep 10 years of highly classified professional files. The penthouse is paid off in cash. It has been secured in an ironclad family trust since 3 years ago. I did that quietly with my elite corporate attorney, the exact same way I did absolutely everything that mattered in my professional life, without announcement, without ceremony, and without anyone's input but my own. I wore Tom Ford Black Orchid perfume to every important professional event of my career. Every federal deposition, every high-stakes board meeting, every forensic authentication session that truly mattered. I wore it to the massive corporate gala, Old Habits. There is one more critical thing you need to fully understand. By the time Brittany stood up at that head table and made her devastating, arrogant announcement, I had absolutely already spoken to my elite legal team. I had already completed a full, grueling neuropsychological evaluation with a state-certified, board-recognized psychiatrist. I had already documented 18 agonizing months of my sister-in-law's manipulative behavior in a written, highly structured corporate timeline, dated and deeply specific. I had known exactly what was coming. I had been preparing for it for 3 silent months. Brittany did not know any of that. Brittany arrived in my older brother's life 8 years ago. She was 28 when they met, efficient, aggressively organized, charming at lavish dinner parties, a senior administrator at a massive private medical network. She managed complex departments, coordinated with dozens of attending physicians, and absolutely never missed a deadline. I genuinely tried to like her. I want to say that clearly, and for the record, I tried. In the beginning, there was absolutely nothing specific to dislike. She was highly professional. She remembered birthdays. She sent expensive thank you notes within 24 hours of an event. But there was something I noticed very early on, an instinct formed over a decade of assessing desperate people who claimed things were one way when they were actually another. Brittany had a subtle, insidious way of positioning herself as the ultimate expert in absolutely every single room she walked into. Not loudly, never loudly, it was a quiet, constant repositioning, the exact way she might say at a family dinner, "Let me look into that for you." And then the looking into would happen entirely under her strict management, with the results she reported back carefully edited through her specific, controlling perspective. Or she would say, "I've already handled that," when absolutely no one had asked her to handle it. Or the terrifying phrase I heard most often from her, "It's already arranged." She used that specific phrase about luxury furniture deliveries, about massive holiday travel plans, about minor medical appointments she had aggressively scheduled on my behalf, without asking me first. Always said with the exact same warm, cloying smile. Always said in a highly calculated way that made any pushback seem completely ungrateful and chaotic. I should have documented exactly how many times I heard it. About 18 months before the corporate gala, Brittany began quietly telling influential people that I was struggling with the pressure. Not dramatically, she was never dramatic about it, she did it casually, like a concerned, loving family member. At a massive Thanksgiving dinner, she mentioned to Mark's wealthy aunt that I had seemed confused and erratic at a recent luxury grocery store. At a charity brunch for my company, she whispered to my chief operating officer that she was a little deeply worried about Victoria's extreme executive burnout. One subtle comment here, one highly concerned aside there, the toxic narrative slowly accumulated. Every single human being forgets something occasionally. Every CEO misplaces a minor file or asks an assistant to remind them of a secondary meeting. When Brittany had been quietly dripping a toxic story about Victoria's satire, cognitive decline and executive breakdown into every family and corporate conversation for 18 months, those small, normal human moments suddenly landed very differently. That was the exact design. She desperately wanted my corporate empire, my Tribeca penthouse appraised at well over $15 million, and my liquid investment accounts held tens of millions, meticulously managed since my firm went public. Brittany's medical administrator salary had a strict ceiling. Mark's income as a mid-level consultant was fine, but nowhere near enough for the massive, billionaire lifestyle she was aggressively planning for them. She had been quietly doing the math since the day my company hit its first major valuation. I want to be entirely fair to Brittany. She genuinely believed she was going to win. She had absolutely every reason to think so. She had executed her hostile takeover plan carefully. She had managed the toxic narrative for a year and a half. She had found a luxury psychiatric facility that accepted involuntary holds. She had filed the dark paperwork. She had arranged the public coup. She only made one massive, fatal error. She profoundly underestimated who she was building a fraudulent case against. My older brother Mark is 36 years old. He is a senior logistics consultant for a massive international supply chain firm. He routinely saves failing corporations for a living. He is in the highly specific and deeply technical domain of global shipping logistics, one of the most capable people I have ever seen work. He is also, and I say this with profound love and zero blame, a man who absolutely does not examine his blind assumptions about the toxic people he implicitly trusts. Mark trusted Brittany the exact same way highly capable, overworked men trust their most reliable corporate assistants completely, utterly, and absolutely without checking. He visited my Tribeca penthouse every 3 or 4 weeks. He never saw anything wrong. I was exactly who I have always been, direct, organized, intensely focused, and a little bit dry. But Brittany's toxic voice was always in his ear afterward. She seemed a little deeply confused when I called her on Monday, Mark. I'm worried, or, I noticed she was aggressively repeating herself at dinner. Do you think the stress of the fintech empire is finally breaking her? They were never lies massive enough to directly confront. It was just a consistent, low-level, insidious pressure on his perception of reality. 18 months of it, slowly bending his view of his fiercely independent sister by microscopic degrees. Mark outsourced his entire family conscience to Brittany, the exact way some exhausted executives outsource their domestic lives entirely without auditing, simply because they blindly trust that the person they chose is managing it correctly. That is absolutely not stupidity, it is a very particular kind of blind trust that becomes, over a long enough timeline, a very particular kind of dangerous blindness. I did not hate my brother for it, but I also absolutely did not tell him what I secretly knew. I made that strategic corporate decision deliberately. If I had warned him, Mark would have gone directly back to Brittany. He would have told her, she would have immediately accelerated the hostile takeover plan, destroyed the fraudulent medical evidence, or done something incredibly desperate that made federal legal action significantly harder. I profoundly needed Mark to see it for himself, not be told about it, not be gently warned. He had to see it. That is the absolute only way it would permanently hold up in his mind. Dr. Alan Red has been my high-end concierge general practitioner for 14 years. He is 58, highly competent, incredibly affable, and manages a luxury private practice in downtown Manhattan. He has known Mark since Mark started his logistics career in the city. They have played aggressive weekend squash together for 12 years. 3 months before the corporate gala, Brittany visited Dr. Red's lax office. She came entirely without me. She brought a beautifully typed, highly official-sounding letter. On a medical template she had meticulously prepared herself. The fraudulent letter stated, in dense clinical-sounding language, that Victoria Sterling displayed severe executive dysfunction, acute paranoia, and extreme cognitive burnout consistent with a stress-induced psychotic break, and strongly recommended immediate mandatory placement in a supervised inpatient psychiatric wellness facility, alongside the immediate appointment of a temporary financial conservator. Dr. Red had seen me the previous week for my routine annual physical. He checked my blood pressure, my cholesterol, and we had a brief discussion about my sleep schedule, which has always been extremely light due to global market hours. He had absolutely not administered any form of psychiatric or cognitive assessment. No psychiatric screening, no executive function testing, no clinical behavioral evaluation. Nothing that would constitute, by any accepted medical standard, a diagnosis of a psychotic break. He signed the devastating letter, after what I was later told by his staff, was a 40-minute closed-door meeting with Brittany. 40 minutes. I have been his premium patient for 14 years. He has never once asked me to name the current president, or count backward from 100. He signed it because Brittany was incredibly organized, highly credible, and because Mark was his weekend squash buddy, and because the absolute path of least resistance was to simply trust the deeply concerned sister-in-law, who had come fully prepared with a flawless document and a diagnosis already neatly written. That is not intentional malice from the doctor, that is something else entirely. It is a profound, terrifying laziness that carries massive life-altering consequences. I found the forged letter exactly 3 months before the corporate gala. I did not find it hidden in a locked drawer. I did not find it intercepted in the mail. Brittany left her expensive designer Birkin bag sitting on my massive marble kitchen island during a Sunday brunch visit, when she briefly went down the hall to use the guest bathroom. The thick manila envelope was highly visible, partially open, sticking out of the luxurious leather bag. I calmly pulled it out. I read the devastating clinical diagnosis, and then I looked very closely at the signature at the absolute bottom. It was incredibly close to Alan Redd's actual signature. Very, very close, but something was slightly, fundamentally wrong, the aggressive loop in the capital R. Slightly wrong is the absolute most dangerous thing I have ever encountered in 10 years of professional forensic auditing. Perfectly wrong is immediately obvious, perfectly right is clean and verified, slightly wrong means someone practiced for hours, but not nearly enough, and they fundamentally didn't know what they were actually trying to practice. I set the fraudulent medical letter down on the marble island. I looked at it for exactly 30 seconds, then I walked directly to the locked filing cabinet in my corner home office. I keep meticulous, exhaustive records. A decade of professional forensic auditing absolutely teaches you to keep everything. Every single piece of correspondence, every corporate report, every minor document with a signature you might ever need to reference again. The intense professional habit carried over flawlessly into my personal life. My secure filing cabinet has over a decade of personal medical documents, organized meticulously by year. My most recent annual physical report was securely in the folder marked 2024. I took it out, I walked back and laid it directly next to Brittany's forged letter on the kitchen island. Two identical signatures, side by side under the bright, unforgiving kitchen pendant lights. I actually have a professional jeweler's loupe in my home office. I still keep one for highly detailed document analysis. I absolutely did not need it. I could clearly see the glaring discrepancy with the naked eye, because I knew exactly what a fraudulent signature looks like. The loop in the capital R of Red was wide, rounded, and generous on the real medical signature. The forged signature had a much sharper, aggressive angle, and a slight rightward lean, where the real one always curved gently left. The baseline of the real signature descended slightly from left to right, a highly consistent, deeply ingrained personal quirk I had seen on 14 years of routine documents from this specific Manhattan physician. The forged signature's baseline was perfectly, mechanically level. Whoever had spent hours practicing this in their kitchen had aggressively corrected for the baseline drift, completely without knowing the drift was actually authentic. A professional high-end corporate forger would have absolutely caught that tiny detail. Brittany was not a professional corporate forger. She was a hospital medical administrator who had spent a Tuesday afternoon secretly teaching herself to mimic a signature she had seen on Mark's routine medical referral forms. She was not terribly bad at it, but she was not nearly bad enough to fool me. I stood perfectly still at my marble kitchen island. My expensive imported espresso was getting cold on the counter behind me. I calmly took my encrypted phone from the pocket of my tailored blazer. I clearly photographed the forged letter. I photographed the real's medical signature. I photographed them side by side with the distinctive marble edge in the frame for verified scale. Then I smoothly slid the forged letter back into its manila envelope. I carefully pressed the flap closed. I replaced it in the expensive Birkin bag, at exactly the precise angle I had found it. I picked up my espresso cup. It was completely cold. I poured it out into the sink and started a fresh, steaming pull. Brittany came back from the hallway bathroom exactly 2 minutes later. She looked at me standing calmly at the counter. She smiled that warm, toxic smile. "Victoria, you absolutely don't have to clean up. I'll get that for you," she said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. I looked directly into her eyes and smiled back. "I've got it," I said smoothly. I had the high-resolution photographs securely backed up to a secure cloud server. I had the real medical signature physically on file. I had a decade of knowing precisely what constitutes irrefutable evidence in a federal court of law. She had been aggressively building a fraudulent medical case against a woman who literally built multi-million-dollar fraud cases for a living. The very next morning, before the global financial markets even opened, I called my elite estate attorney, Claire Harmon. Claire had aggressively handled my massive corporate estate planning and set up my ironclad family trust 3 years ago. She is incredibly direct, relentlessly thorough, and absolutely never wastes a single word. I told her exactly what I had found. I told her about the forged medical letter in the Birkin bag. I told her about the 18 months of insidious incidents I had been meticulously cataloging. She immediately referred me to a highly specialized medical fraud and complex conservatorship litigator. His name was Warren Gould. His massive corner office was in Midtown Manhattan. I met with Warren that following Thursday. I brought exactly 3 things into his boardroom: the high-resolution photographs securely stored on an encrypted tablet, a certified copy of my most recent annual physical, the document with the real medical signature, and a damning 6-page written timeline I had spent the previous evening drafting. 18 agonizing months of incidents, dated, time-stamped, with names and exact context. He told me exactly how New York's complex conservatorship and involuntary psychiatric hold laws actually work. The specific type of placement Brittany had arranged, because it came with a highly restrictive severe cognitive impairment profile that would make seizing my massive financial proxy significantly easier, required a written, legally binding certification from a licensed, state-certified psychiatrist. Not a concierge general practitioner's forged attestation. A top-tier, board-certified psychiatrist on the official state record. Brittany had aggressively relied on a forged GP letter. It was legally, utterly insufficient, not for the luxury involuntary wellness unit she had booked. She assumed she could just drop me off, leverage my confused state, and have the facility rubber stamp the paperwork after I was already locked inside. Warren smiled a very cold smile. Let me refer you to someone who can shut this down before she even finishes her speech. 3 days later, I had a highly confidential appointment with Dr. Miriam Shechek. Dr. Miriam Shechek is 55 years old. She is the precise kind of elite physician who looks directly at you rather than down at her clinical notes. Her private practice is affiliated with the top psychiatric research hospital in the country. She holds elite state certification for complex conservatorship evaluations, the exact, highly specific credential required under state regulation to authorize or permanently deny the type of involuntary hold Brittany was plotting. The intense evaluation took 2 grueling sessions, over 4 hours total. She administered complex cognitive assessments, executive function stress tests, aggressive processing speed drills, and deep psychological profiling. At the absolute end of the second intense session, she sat back in her chair and looked at her notes for a long time. Sterling, she said, her voice filled with professional awe, you are in the 99th percentile for your age cohort, across absolutely all executive and cognitive domains assessed. I want you to fundamentally understand what that actually means. It doesn't mean fine for a stressed CEO, it means exceptionally, terrifyingly sharp. Period. Her official clinical note read, subject demonstrates superior executive function. 0 evidence of impairment, burnout, or psychosis in any domain assessed. Results completely and utterly do not support placement in any level of supervised psychiatric care. Results directly and fundamentally contradict the characterization in the attached document. The attached document was a certified copy of Brittany's forged attestation, which I had provided to Warren, and which Warren had securely provided to her. She also told me the exact thing I already knew from Warren, but profoundly wanted to hear again from a top physician. Without her signature, or that of a comparable state-certified psychiatrist, the Sunrise Wellness Retreat absolutely could not admit me to their involuntary hold unit. The luxury reservation Brittany had aggressively made was entirely dependent on documentation that simply did not exist. I called Dr. Shechek the morning of the massive corporate gala, just to check in. I wanted to confirm she had received the updated, expedited legal packet from Warren's office. She said she had. She casually mentioned she was staying at the Plaza Hotel for a high-level psychiatric conference, exactly 4 floors above the grand ballroom where my gala was being held. I smiled into the phone. "I hope I won't need to bother you this evening, doctor," I said. She replied, her voice smooth and ready, "If you do, call me immediately." I filed that incredible coincidence away in my mind, the exact way I always filed things that might matter later. Warren had sent Dr. Shechek's official evaluation report to his office via secure courier 2 weeks after the sessions completed. He called me the absolute second it arrived on his desk. "It's here, Victoria," he said, "the heaviest light thing I have ever held." I knew exactly what he meant. A sealed, tamper-proof manila envelope, 8 pages inside. The physical weight of it was entirely wrong for what it contained. It felt far too light to carry that much absolute truth, that much ironclad protection, that many years of my fiercely independent life made countable and verified in a psychiatric score. The corporate gala was on a Thursday. My executive team had booked the massive grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel 6 months in advance. Capacity for 400 elite guests. Brittany had aggressively offered to handle the minor family details and the anniversary toast. I noted the phrase. I did not respond to it. I let her handle it. I got dressed that morning in my minimalist penthouse. It was late November, cold and flat, the kind of sky that looks like someone pressed it down hard against the city skyline. I put on the bespoke tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit I wore for my most brutal federal depositions. I wore the vintage Cartier watch I had bought myself the day my fintech firm hit $100 million in verified revenue. I held the dark glass bottle of black orchid perfume for a long moment before I pressed it to my wrists. I had been wearing it since my very first major corporate audit when I was 24. My hands had been perfectly steady then, and the opposing corporate attorney had comprehensively underestimated me. I wore it to every major deposition after that, every brutal court appearance, every expert witness session, where a desperate CEO's professional credibility or freedom hung entirely on whether I could prove something real was real, and something fraudulent was fraudulent. I pressed the perfume to both wrists, old habit, on the long quiet drive to the Plaza Hotel. I thought about absolutely nothing specific. I was not afraid, I was not anxiously rehearsing my lines, I was simply profoundly present. A decade of expert witness work teaches you one crucial thing above absolutely all else. Do not anticipate the room. Let the irrefutable evidence speak when it is precisely the right time. My chief operating officer, Elena, was already at the massive venue when I arrived. She had saved me a seat at the main head table to her immediate right. Elena has been my right hand for 8 years. She is fiercely intelligent, utterly loyal, and has never once said a thing she did not absolutely mean. She hugged me, then held me at arm's length and looked closely at my face. "You look like you're about to cross-examine a hostile board of directors," she whispered. I told her I was just there for the dark chocolate cake. That was exactly half true. The first hour of the massive gala was pleasant in the specific, terrifying way that hours are pleasant when you know a catastrophic event is rapidly approaching. Mark gave a toast first. It was warm, bumbling, and genuine. He talked about a road trip we took when I was a teenager, just the two of us to see our parents' old house. He remembered the specific details. I had completely forgotten. He remembered that I watched my brother and felt the particular, enduring love I have always had for him. The kind that does not require anything in return. The kind that held firm, even through 18 agonizing months of his blind absence. Not physical absence, but the specific heartbreaking absence of a man who has totally outsourced his attention and his conscience to a toxic partner. Brittany aggressively worked the massive room while Mark spoke. She was highly skilled at it. She moved from table to table with her crystal champagne flute, leaning in to speak quietly to my major investors, touching people's arms, positioning herself as the caring family matriarch. At one specific point, she stood near the back table where my board of directors was seated, and I clearly saw the toxic shift in their expressions as she spoke. The small, sympathetic tilt of their heads, the gentle reaching out to touch her arm. I absolutely could not hear what she was whispering. I completely did not need to. Alina leaned toward me. Are you hearing this? She asked quietly. I said every single word. The magnificent corporate cake was brought out exactly at 7:06 p.m. The executive chef carried it in on a polished board. 4 massive tiers, dark chocolate, genuine gold leaf, the deep, heavy scent of premium chocolate hit the massive room before it even reached the head table. I had requested that specific cake myself. I had told the chef exactly what the monumental occasion was. The atmosphere of the grand ballroom instantly shifted. It smelled exactly like every high-stakes federal courtroom I had ever walked into. It smelled like something fundamentally undeniably true. At exactly 7:11 p.m., Brittany set her crystal champagne flute down, immediately picked it back up, and aggressively tapped it with her silver dessert fork. The massive room went dead quiet. She stood up, she smiled her blinding smile. I am going to tell you exactly what she said to 400 of the most powerful people in Manhattan, as accurately as I possibly can. She began by praising what she called my relentless, exhausting corporate life. She mentioned my fintech empire briefly, calling me a dedicated numbers girl, which was technically accurate, though she said it the exact way arrogant people mention minor hobbies at cocktail parties, without any actual weight. She mentioned Mark briefly. She said, "The family has been incredibly grateful for everything Victoria has built." Then she paused dramatically, her face shifted perfectly, not from happiness to sadness, but from happiness to a highly specific, calculated kind of deep medical concern. The absolute face of someone who has relentlessly practiced the transition in a mirror. "We have been aggressively watching Victoria closely over the past year," she said loudly into the microphone. "And as her only family, we have had to make some incredibly important, painful executive decisions. Victoria's extreme executive health journey has given us a lot of dark things to think about." Health journey, those two deeply manipulative words landed in the massive room, exactly like a live grenade placed carefully on a glass table. "We wanted to share some necessary news tonight. We absolutely know how much you all rely on her." She described the Sunrise Wellness Retreat, the sprawling, locked grounds, the aggressive psychiatric team on site 24 hours, the mandatory digital disconnect program, the community of other burnt-out executives, the highly devoted medical staff. She spoke for 4 agonizing minutes. She spoke about me completely in the third person. I was sitting exactly 3 feet to her left at the head table. She never once looked at me to see how I was receiving this catastrophic news. That tiny detail told me absolutely everything. She had internally decided this was not a conversation. It was a hostile corporate announcement. The conversation in her arrogant mind was already over. At the absolute end of the speech, at the exact final second, with the toxic smile still full and the champagne flute still raised, she said, "Victoria is stepping down as CEO and taking an indefinite mandatory medical leave at the Sunrise Wellness Retreat starting tomorrow morning. As her family, we have already arranged the temporary financial conservatorship." One clueless junior analyst at the back table began to politely applaud. The entire massive room looked directly at me. I calmly set down my silver fork. I looked at the dark chocolate corporate cake. The gold leaf was still glowing under the chandeliers. 4 tiers, 400 guests, the heavy smell of absolute truth. I did not speak for exactly 4 seconds. I have given expert witness testimony in 14 federal fraud cases. I know exactly how to make 6 quiet words land like a federal verdict. I smoothly picked up my imported linen napkin, patted my mouth, and set it neatly down on the table. I stood up. I said, "Thank you, Brittany, I won't be going." I said it clearly, without raising my voice a single decibel, without looking away from her terrified eyes, without hesitation, tremor, or apology. 6 lethal words. The massive ballroom went incredibly, utterly still. The junior analyst who had been applauding stopped instantly. Brittany's warm smile held its shape. It was a genuinely extraordinary psychological thing to watch. The terrifying speed of her internal recalibration. 1 second she processed, she aggressively adjusted, she answered, "Victoria, we've discussed this deeply." We had absolutely not discussed anything. I want to be profoundly clear about that. In 18 months of covertly managing my health journey, Brittany had never once sat across from me and said, "Victoria, I am genuinely concerned about your executive stress." She had never once asked me what I wanted for my own massive empire. She had made toxic assessments, had dark conversations with absolutely everyone except me, had forged a medical document, had booked a locked room, had aggressively arranged a hostile takeover for a Friday. We had absolutely not discussed anything. We have absolutely not discussed this, I said. Same exact tone, same flat, lethal delivery. You have attempted to arrange something that is entirely different. Mark violently shifted in his chair. I could see the panicked motion in my peripheral vision. Alina did not move a single muscle. The entire room had the suffocating quality of a federal deposition when the very first devastating document is presented to a hostile witness. 400 people holding their breath, desperately waiting to see if the witness will crack or hold. I was the witness. I was also in this specific case the executioner. I was absolutely going to hold. Brittany shifted her weight, a small nervous movement. Her smile changed, still there, but significantly thinner, stretched tight over rising panic. "Victoria," she said, her voice dripping with weaponized condescension, "Doctor Red has expressed incredibly serious medical concerns about your severe cognitive burnout. We are absolutely doing this because we love you. The legal arrangements are made. The conservatorship move is tomorrow." I unclasped my sleek leather portfolio. "Dr. Red," I said, my voice echoing in the silent ballroom, "has absolutely not administered a cognitive assessment on me. Not once in 14 years he has submitted a forged medical letter. I know exactly what the fraudulent letter says." Brittany. That stopped her dead. The desperate calculation was starkly visible briefly beneath the fake concern. I could literally see her rapidly measuring how much I actually knew against how much she desperately needed me not to know. Mark finally spoke. "Victoria, please, maybe we should discuss this privately." "Mark," I looked directly at him, "your toxic wife has made a hostile corporate announcement in front of 400 people, as if the fraudulent decision is final. It is absolutely not final." He looked desperately down at the table. Brittany aggressively addressed the massive room. Then she did it gracefully. I will absolutely give her that. She pivoted to the elite audience exactly, as if she were managing a difficult stakeholder meeting at her hospital, desperately trying to bring the furious board members back on board. "I know this is incredibly uncomfortable for everyone," she said, her voice warm again. "Families sometimes have to make incredibly hard, painful choices when a loved one simply can't make them for herself anymore. That's what deep love looks like sometimes. It doesn't always look easy when a loved one is failing." Is failing? Present tense, as if I were already locked away somewhere else, as if the 34-year-old CEO standing 3 feet away in a Tom Ford suit were a completely irrelevant hypothetical. One of my major venture capital investors, a ruthless 70-year-old billionaire named Howard, sitting at the premier front table, spoke up. His voice was bone dry. "Victoria," he said loudly, "do you want to leave your own party?" I looked at Howard. "No, Howard, I deeply want to stay exactly right here." Brittany looked at me, pure hatred flashing in her eyes. I looked back, unblinking. "Victoria, Dr. Red's psychiatric letter has been very clear about your severe psychosis." "I know exactly what Dr. Red's forged letter says." "Brittany," I interrupted smoothly. I let that heavy word sit in the room for a long moment. "Forged, I have a high-resolution photograph of it." Something dark and violent moved aggressively across her face. Fast gone, the panicked calculation. She had absolutely not expected me to say I had photographed it. There was a suffocating silence after that. 3 seconds, 4 seconds. A waiter came in from the kitchen hallway, saw the frozen room, and immediately retreated backward. Brittany aggressively reset her face. She desperately put her medical concern back in place. She reached for her empty champagne flute. "I genuinely think we should move forward," she said rapidly. "We have a lovely corporate evening to get back to." "Victoria, I know this is surprising, but when you've had some time to..." I reached calmly for my sleek black leather portfolio on the table. Not dramatically, not as a theatrical gesture, I simply wanted to open my own verified documents. Brittany's hand moved. It moved violently fast, faster than I ever expected from someone who had spent 18 grueling months being so incredibly careful. She struck the portfolio from below, angled sharply. But she missed the leather folder and hit my heavy glass water goblet instead. The thick crystal goblet went sideways, then it went violently down. Ice water and shattered crystal exploded across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing directly onto the hem of my tailored charcoal suit. The massive ballroom went completely airless. Someone near the back made a sharp sound. Not a word, just the involuntary breath 400 people make when something catastrophic they cannot take back has violently happened. Mark stood up sharply. Brittany. Just her name, nothing after it. Brittany stood very, very still. She was breathing heavily, differently. 18 months of careful toxic management had just completely cracked in one violent motion. One split second, where her hand moved aggressively faster than her fake composure. I looked at the shattered crystal on the floor. The ice cubes were melting into the thick carpet. I looked at my sister-in-law. She was looking at her own hand exactly as if it had profoundly surprised her. I thought, there it is, the terrifying thing she has been hiding for 18 months. Not the cruelty, not the hostile takeover plan, but the absolute panic underneath the plan. The exact moment when control violently slips, and what was always there comes screaming through. I did not say a single word to her. I looked out at the silent sea of 400 elite guests. I looked toward a specific table 4 rows back. I nodded exactly once. A woman stood up from that table. She wore a dark, perfectly tailored blazer and carried a thick manila envelope. 55 years old, silver-threaded hair, pulled straight back. The kind of absolute bearing that comes from 2 decades of walking into rooms where someone is going to dispute what you are about to say, and being right absolutely every single time. Dr. Shechek calmly walked up to the head table. She did not look at the shattered crystal on the floor. She looked directly at me. I said, Dr. Shechek, thank you so much for coming, she said. Mims Sterling. She took the empty chair directly across from Brittany, the chair Elena had smoothly pulled out for her. She placed the heavy manila envelope on the white tablecloth and set her hands perfectly flat on either side of it. The envelope was sealed, certified, the exact same one Warren had called me about. The heaviest light thing I had ever seen someone carry. 8 pages inside, 10 years of my fierce corporate independence and executive sanity measured, verified and sealed in a single folder. Dr. Shechek looked directly at Brittany. My name is Dr. Miriam Shechek, she said, her voice carrying the absolute weight of irrefutable medical authority. I am a top-tier psychiatric evaluator affiliated with the State Research Hospital. I hold elite state certification for complex conservatorship and involuntary hold assessments under New York state law. She looked briefly at me, then back at Brittany's terrified face. I completed a full, exhaustive neuropsychological evaluation of Ms. Sterling 6 weeks ago. The clinical results are in this envelope. Before I open it, I want to address one incredibly urgent procedural matter. She folded her hands. The Sunrise Wellness Retreat contacted my private office this very morning. They desperately wanted to confirm the admission documentation for tomorrow's involuntary hold. I told them the severe cognitive restriction admission absolutely required my written certification. They said they understood, but they did not have my certification on file, because I had not provided one. I had not provided one because my exhaustive evaluation of Ms. Sterling absolutely does not support any form of psychiatric placement under any criterion. She locked eyes with Brittany. The luxury reservation, as currently documented with your fraudulent paperwork, cannot be processed, Brittany stammered. I don't understand. I completely know you don't, Dr. Shechek said coldly. I'll explain. She opened the heavy manila envelope, 2 documents. She removed them meticulously, setting them face up on the white tablecloth, oriented directly toward Mark, toward Brittany, and toward the front row of my stunned board members. Document 1, the clinical evaluation report, 8 pages. The bold header read, Neuropsychological Evaluation, Victoria Sterling, CEO, Sterling Analytics. The executive summary on page 1 was highlighted in aggressive yellow marker. Subject demonstrates superior executive function, percentile ranking 99th for highly stressed corporate executives. Zero evidence of impairment, burnout, or psychosis. Results completely and utterly do not support placement in a locked wellness unit or any other form of supervised psychiatric care. Results directly and fundamentally contradict the attached physician attestation, dated September 4. Document 2. Dr. Shechek laid it squarely beside the first. It was a massive, high-resolution comparison sheet. 2 distinct columns. Left column, a pristine scan. Dr. Alan Redd's actual verifimetric signature, obtained by Warren Gould's aggressive federal subpoena 3 weeks prior. Redd's real, verified signature, 14 years of it, consistent, highly distinctive. The specific left-leaning baseline, and the wide-open loop in the R that I had recognized immediately under my kitchen lights. Right column. The fraudulent signature from the medical attestation letter Brittany had covertly filed with the Sunrise Wellness Retreat. An elite, forensic handwriting specialist had meticulously prepared the comparison. 7 specific points of glaring divergence were aggressively circled, in bright red ink. The baseline angle, the severe loop closure, the sharp R formation, the mechanical crossbar on the T, and 3 microscopic pressure points. Dr. Shechek pointed a manicured finger at the paper. This, she said, pointing to the right, is the forged attestation filed by Brittany Sterling with the Sunrise Intake Office on September 12. This, she pointed to the left, is Dr. Redd's actual, legally documented signature. My forensic handwriting specialist prepared this devastating analysis. 7 red circles of absolute forgery. Mark picked up the comparison sheet. He is a senior consultant. He analyzes complex global supply chain documents every single day. He knows exactly what a fraudulent corporate document looks like when it is placed under a microscope. He held the heavy paper. He looked at the left column. He looked at the right column. He set it down. My brother knows what a forged signature looks like. He knew the absolute second he saw it. He set the paper down incredibly carefully. He meticulously aligned the sharp edge of the paper with the edge of the white tablecloth, an unnecessary, desperate precision, the exact habit of a terrified man trying to control a tiny, insignificant thing, because his entire massive world has just violently collapsed. He stood up slowly. He walked completely around the head table to me. He did not say anything. He came to my side and his legs completely gave out. Not a dramatic theatrical gesture, not a performance. He simply collapsed beside me, one knee on the floor of the Plaza Hotel, looking up at me from below. It was the exact way he used to look at me when I was a teenager, and he had broken something of our parents and didn't know how to fix it. He said, "Victoria, how long have you known?" I said, 3 agonizing months, Mark. He was quiet for a long moment. "You completely didn't tell me. I profoundly needed you to see it exactly for yourself," I said softly. He looked at the devastating forensic comparison sheet on the table. Then he looked at his shaking hands. Then he violently put his face in his hands. He cried. Not loudly. Mark absolutely does not cry loudly. It was the silent, agonizing kind of crying. The kind that has absolutely no performance in it whatsoever. The specific kind that violently happens when something fundamental in your life has shattered completely, and your physical body needs a moment to catch up to the horrifying reality your mind already fully understands. 400 elite guests in the grand ballroom, not a single sound. Brittany desperately said his name. "Mark, don't," he said sharply, without even lifting his face from his hands. One word. Brittany was completely silent. I put my hand on the back of Mark's shoulder. Exactly once, just the physical weight of a hand, not trying to magically fix anything, just being present. He breathed deeply once, twice, then he sat back heavily on his heels. He looked up at me. "Alan absolutely didn't write that medical letter," he said, his voice entirely broken. "No, Mark," I said. "He didn't. He called me," Mark whispered, "just now from the squash club. He completely panicked. He said he has absolutely no memory of signing a letter regarding your severe cognitive function. He said he would absolutely never." Mark stopped again, choking on the horrific truth. I know, I said, Victoria. His voice was incredibly quiet. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. I looked at my older brother, the boy who inherited the exact same trust fund I did. The man who aggressively trusted the wrong woman. I know you are, Mark, I said. That's enough. Brittany desperately tried to speak again. There's been a massive misunderstanding. She stammered, her voice shaking violently. I was only trying to desperately help. Victoria has been struggling under the corporate pressure, and I just wanted to make sure she was safe. Elena, my chief operating officer, finally spoke. In 8 years of running a massive fintech empire together, I had absolutely never heard Elena raise her voice at a board meeting. She absolutely did not raise it now. She simply spoke into the massive room the exact way she used to speak to terrified junior analysts during a high-stakes corporate audit with absolute, devastating authority. Safe, Elena repeated, her voice dripping with pure ice. Brittany completely stopped speaking. Safe, as Anna said again, I have worked beside this brilliant woman for 8 grueling years. I have watched her dismantle a massive, multi-million-dollar corporate fraud scheme in 45 minutes. I have watched her walk directly into a federal courtroom and aggressively explain a complex algorithmic forgery to a jury of people who had absolutely never seen a line of code in their lives. They understood her perfectly. They convicted the billionaire CEO. I have watched her aggressively manage her investments, run her massive empire, and remember the exact name of every single junior employee in every room she walks into. Elena looked at Brittany with pure disgust. She has absolutely never been confused. Not once, not for a single microscopic moment in a decade. Brittany looked desperately at Mark. Mark was still on the floor beside me. He absolutely did not look back at her. Dr. Shechuk finally spoke. Brittany, she addressed her with chilling professional detachment. I am a mandatory federal reporter under state medical abuse statutes. The fraudulent documents on this table, the forged physician attestation, and the documented pattern of insidious conduct described in Ms. Sterling's corporate timeline constitute severe medical fraud and attempted conservatorship abuse. I am legally required to submit a comprehensive report to Adult Protective Services and the State Medical Board. Dr. Shechuk continued seamlessly. My elite forensic specialist has also securely forwarded the handwriting analysis to federal authorities regarding the felony forgery of a medical document to seize financial assets. Your corporate attorney will receive official copies of all my documentation by tomorrow morning. She said it completely plainly, without an ounce of drama, the exact way she stated clinical psychiatric findings. Brittany stood up slowly. She picked up her expensive Birkin bag, the exact same bag I had pulled the forged document from 3 months prior. She looked at the head table, at the devastating forensic comparison sheet, at Mark, broken on the floor, at Dr. Shechuk, at me. She did not say a single word. She couldn't. The narrative she had spent 18 months meticulously building was completely, permanently dead. She turned and walked out of the massive grand ballroom. I watched her go. The massive, heavy mahogany doors of the Plaza Hotel Grand Ballroom opened. Cold Manhattan air rushed in briefly, and then they closed with a heavy thud. I absolutely did not say a single word to her retreating back. There was completely nothing left to say. Everything that desperately needed to be said had been unequivocally stated by an 8-page elite evaluation report, 2 contrasting medical signatures, and a brilliantly loyal woman who had been my fiercely dedicated chief operating officer for 8 years. Mark got up slowly from the floor, he heavily in the empty chair beside mine. He did not speak, and I profoundly did not need him to. We have always understood the complex silence between us. We learned it from our parents, who always believed that the spaces between words were just as critical as the words themselves. Dr. Shechuk meticulously gathered her devastating documents. She placed them back in the thick manila envelope. She smoothly gave me a professional business card with Warren Gould's secure private number written on the back, along with a brief note about the next aggressive federal steps which I already knew, but deeply appreciated the formality of. She said, "I'll be in touch Monday morning, Victoria." She firmly shook my hand. She left the grand ballroom exactly as powerfully as she had entered it. Elena quietly refilled my crystal water goblet from a fresh pitcher. She absolutely did not comment on what had just violently happened. That was exactly correct. A few minutes later, the executive event manager came into the private ballroom. He was carrying something small, a single-tier, pristine vanilla cake with a single glowing candle. He set it gently down in front of me, completely ignoring the shattered crystal on the floor. "Happy 10-year corporate anniversary, Ms. Sterling," he said. His voice was incredibly careful, deeply kind, the highly specific kind of careful kindness that professionals offer when they have witnessed something they do not fully understand, but know was incredibly serious and dangerous. I looked at the minimalist vanilla cake, one single candle. I thought about the massive 4 tiers of dark chocolate and gold leaf on the floor. I thought about a decade of brutal federal depositions, the specific smell of Tom Ford Black Orchid, and exactly what it meant to stand in a massive room with irrefutable evidence that absolutely no one could argue with. The room still held the faint, heavy smell of the first dark chocolate cake mixed with the cold air from the open doors, and the profound, unmistakable atmosphere of a massive room in which something fundamentally true had just been established. It smelled exactly right. Howard, the billionaire venture capitalist from the front table, started to clap quietly, one pair of powerful hands, then Elena, then the entire board of directors, then the massive room. Absolutely no one cheered, no one spoke a single word, just 400 people clapping in deep, respectful silence. I leaned forward and blew out the single candle. "Before I tell you exactly what happened after that night, I want to ask you a serious question. Have you ever had to wait quietly for someone you love to see the horrifying truth for themselves? Not argue, not frantically convince, just fiercely silently wait while they figure it out. Tell me in the comments below, because that is the absolute hardest kind of professional patience I know of. And I desperately want to know if it's familiar to you. Alpha Mom Stories, hit subscribe if you haven't. Stay for this last brilliant part. Here is exactly what happened after the corporate gala. Federal authorities and Adult Protective Services opened a massive joint criminal investigation within 10 days. The lead federal investigator came to my minimalist Tribeca penthouse. I sat at my massive marble kitchen island and gave her the exact same 6-page corporate timeline I had given Warren, along with the high-resolution photographs of the forged medical letter and the real signature, the elite psychiatric evaluation report from Dr. Shechek, and a highly detailed written account of the corporate gala. I fully cooperated with absolutely everything. I have spent a decade deeply understanding that legal documentation is absolutely not a gesture. It is a structure. You build it correctly, and it holds forever. Dr. Alan Redd received a massive formal complaint filed with the State Medical Examining Board. The devastating complaint alleged that he had carelessly signed, or allowed his signature to be illegally affixed to, a document attesting to severe cognitive impairment in a patient he had absolutely never assessed for cognitive function. The elite medical board aggressively required him to complete a 40-hour mandatory continuing education program in medical ethics and psychiatric assessment standards. His lucrative medical license was not fully revoked, but his name is now permanently part of a highly formal public record. His relationship with me as my premium concierge physician ended that exact same month. I now securely see a top physician recommended directly by Dr. Shechek. The Sunrise Wellness Retreat received massive formal documentation from Warren's aggressive legal office and Dr. Shechek's elite practice, fully confirming that the pending involuntary memory care admission was completely unsupported by clinical evidence and that the submitting documentation had been officially identified as severely fraudulent. The involuntary reservation in my name was completely cancelled. I was told this in a highly formal letter that arrived exactly 10 days after the corporate gala. I read it at my marble kitchen island with a fresh cup of imported espresso. Mark completely moved out of the massive luxury house he shared with Brittany exactly 3 weeks after the corporate gala. He called me the very morning he left. It was incredibly early, around 6:30 a.m., he said. Victoria, I'm so sorry, I completely know that doesn't cover it, but I am profoundly sorry. I said, Mark, I fully know that does cover it. He said, I don't definitively know what happens now. I said, that's perfectly all right, you absolutely don't have to definitively know yet. Brittany was immediately fired from her prestigious hospital administrator position. The federal medical fraud investigation made her entirely unemployable in the healthcare sector. She is currently facing massive felony charges for forging a medical professional's signature in a desperate attempt to seize financial proxy. I do not fully know what will happen to Mark and Brittany's toxic marriage. That is absolutely not my story to tell. What I do know is this: Mark has dinner with me every other Sunday now. He calls me on Tuesdays. He is slowly rebuilding the fierce independent part of himself that he totally outsourced for 8 agonizing years. That deeply takes time. I am incredibly patient with it. Elena and I had a celebratory lunch the following Tuesday. She ordered the expensive French onion soup. I had the premium seared salmon. We talked about a massive new corporate acquisition strategy she had recommended 3 weeks earlier, and about whether my fintech firm would expand into the European market in the spring. We absolutely did not talk about the corporate gala. We have fundamentally not needed to. My $15 million Tribeca penthouse is still entirely mine. The ironclad family trust is fully intact. The penthouse is absolutely not for sale. It has never been in any microscopic danger of being sold. As it actually turns out, the complex corporate trust documents would have made a forced sale legally impossible, regardless of Brittany's desperate hostile takeover plans. But it is incredibly good to state it plainly and publicly. My massive house is still mine. My fiercely independent life is still fiercely mine. My 9-figure investment accounts are securely in the exact same elite institution they have been in for a decade. Absolutely no one has access to them but me. I am absolutely still wearing Tom Ford Black Orchid perfume on incredibly important days. Here's the absolute truth I know for a fact. The highly toxic person who loudly claims you are losing your mind is absolutely not worried about your sanity. They are deeply, profoundly terrified of the massive empire you possess, and what you are still fiercely capable of protecting. You absolutely do not have to argue with a lie the exact moment it is told. You can calmly document it. You can wait for the exact moment where the brutal truth has enough absolute structure around it that it simply cannot be dismantled. You can highly choose your strategic timing and your legal mechanism. The quieter I am, the more terrifyingly certain I am. I still fiercely wear the Black Orchid perfume every single important day. This was absolutely one of them. If this story mattered to you, subscribe to Alpha Mom Stories. Share it with someone who desperately needs to hear it. Leave me a massive comment. Tell me exactly what you would have done in that corporate boardroom. I'm Victoria Sterling, and I will absolutely see you in the next boardroom.